1. I'm not really a petty guy. I have some stories I could tell where I come off as petty, but I never mean it that way. I'm just an autistic dude with ADHD. But I just remembered a story from my childhood where I was very intentionally petty. And this is a bit relevant, since some could get confused. I'm a trans man. It was the summer of 2007, and for the first time in my long, long life, my birthday wasn't on summer vacation. I was turning 7. It was also the first birthday ever my mom bought a present for me, so I was extra stoked. I got a Barbie Rapunzel doll for my birthday. This was the shit the girls wanted. The movie had just been released the year prior, I'm not American, and the doll was half a year later. So no one except for me had that doll. Don't worry, all this is really relevant. I'm a kid who got bullied a lot, since kindergarten, and since every kid I went to kindergarten with was practically my neighbor, the bullying carried over to elementary school. I was not only a loser without friends, I was the loser between the losers. I was always alone, so obviously I was even happier that all the popular girls wanted to talk to me and play with me on my birthday. But some of you already guessed it. The girls were obviously much more interested in my doll. Because of my circumstances, I had to mature much faster than my peers, so obviously I catched up almost immediately what was going on. I felt miserable almost the entire day until one of the girls asked me something like,
"Hey, you haven't already decided who sits with you, right? Can we sit at your table?"
Let me explain. Back in my days, in my elementary school, whenever a child had their birthday on that school day, we would have a party at the end of that day. The birthday kid would choose up to 5 kids that were allowed to sit at the big round table with the birthday child. Usually the parents would bring a cake, or pie, or some other sweets. Some parents would even join. My mom obviously couldn't join. I knew she had 3 different jobs, so obviously didn't have any time. Every time the birthday child was pressured by their classmates into choosing 5 people. Because after the birthday child, the kids at their table would be the next ones getting served a slice of cake or sweets, etc. And obviously, we were also allowed to choose the games as well. Kids being kids, that was seen as super cool. Basically, if you were tight with the birthday kid, you were at the top of the food chain. Almost always the popular kids were the ones sitting at that table, making them even more popular. My little brother required much more attention, so I was basically accustomed to not getting what I wanted. I didn't care about the seating, but I also knew they cared a lot about it. So after getting treated like shit the whole day, I was thinking, you know what, fuck it. Obviously paraphrasing here. Tomorrow begins summer vacation, and even after that, we're moving out. I'm not going to see these fuckers ever again. So I had a glorious idea. I had a plastic bag in my backpack. Most of the time, I used a plastic bag to pack my lunches, because Mother taught us to recycle. So the girl is asking me that question, and I'm like, hold on. Go to my backpack, pull out the empty, used plastic bag, look them straight in the eyes and say, the first 5 willing to put their bare foot into this used plastic bag for a minute are the ones I will choose to sit with me. First they were reluctant, but one by one they did it. I was feeling so good. I was obviously not going to choose them, but when the time was nigh, I felt a bit bad for them after all. Now wait a sec, let's get back to my mom. Like I said, she didn't have time because she was busy providing for us, so obviously I wasn't expecting anything big. Anything at all, honestly. My teacher did tell me around noon that my mom had dropped by around lunchtime to bring my cake. I was happy about that, but like I said, I didn't expect anything more than a store-bought cake. So I was starting to feel bad, contemplating whether I should do it or not until my teacher asked me to set up the table with her. I was extremely surprised. My mom hadn't bought a cake. She made that cake. My mother, who had 3 jobs, 5 kids, and on top of that diabetes, made a huge fucking cake for me, but no. Of course, we were talking about my mom here. She had also made other baked goods on top of that, and cooked a meal for the whole class. Thanks to my mom, not only was I convinced to make my tiny little revenge, I was also going out with a bang. Choosing time, and obviously the popular girls were expecting their names being called out. But damn, I must have been really pissed because I remember I knew exactly which people I was going to choose. But every time I called out a name, I made a huge, dramatic pause between each name, seeing the girls' faces turn from hopeful to disappointed each time, and I'm convinced that the universe was on my side because the popular kids were all seated to the back, having a miserable time, and that's how I used a plastic bag to get my tiny, petty, dirty revenge. Remembering this story, I miss my mom even more now. No, not dead, just transphobic. She gave it her all to raise us, and even after everything I went through, you could say I would still gladly give up a foot for her. It was completely random that I chose the plastic bag, but like I already mentioned, I was always packing my lunches in reusable plastic bags, so yeah, I knew the bag was dirty, and it would be gross to put a whole foot in there for a minute. For why I used it, I wanted them to prove to me that they were really willing to sit at the table, so I could humiliate them even more after. I didn't mention, though, that everyone was watching them while they were doing that, and kids being kids, they obviously got laughed at, hence the humiliation part. Another thing I want to mention is that I don't mind compliments, but this story is almost 2 decades old, and I was retelling a story I remembered. It's been over for quite some time. I was just remembering it because my boyfriend and I were talking about my birthday for this year now. If you could excuse me, I have to finish my ritual for cursing my enemies. Have a great day, gang. 2. This happened several years ago when I was part of a Christian cult church and in leadership. Anyways, on to the story. Back when I was 22 and a young, impressionable young adult, I was part of the media team for this church. We were responsible for creating videos and flyers, as well as posting on social media and taking pictures, etc. This was volunteer work, but the pastor, we'll call him Pastor Corruption, was an anal, cold-hearted dictator of the religious institution who would often give us last-minute projects that would keep us up all night in order to make a video to play during service the next day. We averaged 3 to 5 hours of sleep per night, but this was while I was in school, so during this time, in order to stay on top of my homework and other projects, I would average closer to 2 or 3 hours per night. And to be honest, I'm not sure how I survived with only having occasional bouts of suicidal ideation and paranoia or delusions. Pastor Corruption loved money. He had a giant 6-bedroom house for himself and his wife, only complete with heated driveways and the latest model Cadillac, which sat atop of said driveway. The church building itself was overinflated, which sat close to 1,000, but maybe had a congregation of only 400 or so. More than Pastor Corruption loved money, he loved other people's money. 70% of the sermons were regarding how well you needed to give the shirt off your back to the church, or else you didn't love God and were going to hell. Which is ironic, considering that their accountant had been caught embezzling funds in the past. This went beyond tithes, which was 10% of what you make, and included pledges, fundraisers, giving for church events, and going to retreats that made a profit from the attendees. Pastor Corruption and his pack of goons, aka associate pastors, who also shamed you for not giving money and being poor, would openly brag about how God blessed them after these rounds of extortion. Well, one day, it is near Pastor Corruption's birthday, and his pack of goons decided that the pastor's car from last year's model was too old, and he needed a brand new car. They took a pledge from all the ministry departments to pay for said car. The minimum pledge you were allowed to make was $300, and the media team was no exception. Me, being a broke college kid with a minimum wage part-time job, decided that was impossible, and I just wasn't going to pledge anything. This led to several hour-long lectures and shaming sessions about how I was seen as a leader. I wasn't seen at all since I was always working behind the scenes, and I needed to set an example. Finally, I got fed up and worn down, to the point I confessed that I couldn't pledge because that would be taking all of my rent money. I lived with some other leaders from the church at the time and shared a room with another girl. $300 doesn't seem like a lot now, but at the time, for not even having my own space or a place for my bed, This was highway robbery, especially for a broke college kid. A girl who lived with me, who was also lecturing me, told me just pledge with the money and I can pay rent later. Well, I was coerced into giving the $300 for Pastor Corruption's stupid car, and now he had 2 brand new Cadillacs sitting in his heated driveway. 3 days after rent was due, the girl who lectured me about pledging comes up and asks me for the rent money. The conversation basically goes like this. I don't have it yet.
What do you mean you don't have it? I gave you 3 extra days to figure out something.
What am I supposed to do? Pull it out of thin air?
Maybe you should be more responsible with your spending.
I have spent $2.16 on myself in the last 3 weeks, and it was to get a coffee, so I don't crash my car while driving because of lack of sleep.
I'll give you until the end of this week, but you can't expect us to cover you any longer than that. You are being extremely selfish.
Now, on top of worrying about juggling projects between school and the church, I need to worry about not getting evicted. Then I come up with a plan. I'll just pawn my laptop. My laptop was brand new, since it had just come out recently and I decided to splurge and buy the latest model when my last 6-year-old laptop took a dump on me a few months before. I used it for schoolwork, but they had labs I could use on campus that would help me get by. However, the other thing I used it for was media projects for the church. You know how Pastor Corruption likes money? Well, he didn't like spending money, so the media team had a 13-year-old desktop that was overloaded with files, which severely slowed down its already laggy performance, and caused it to take several hours to render videos if they didn't fail or corrupt. When I had gotten my laptop, it was fairly decent at rendering large video files in under 10 minutes and had amazing clarity and graphics. So, they had convinced me to switch to using my laptop for all things media-related, rather than using the decade-old desktop. I didn't mind because it didn't interfere with my schoolwork that much, but all the templates for social media and other videos and files were on my laptop now, meaning every week I was responsible for getting everything updated and handing off the final version of the file to the head of the media team. The girls I lived with would help me edit these files when we were home and were the leaders of the media team. This means that all the recent files of projects they needed were on my laptop, and no backups made on the church-owned desktop. I pawned my laptop, got the rent money, and paid the leader without saying anything about how I managed to get the money in a single day. Saturday night rolls around, which is usually when we worked on the video files we needed for the next day, and they asked me where my laptop is so we can get started. I don't have it.
Where is it?
I pawned it.
What?
I pawned it.
Why?
I needed to pay you rent. I had no other way to get you the money. I couldn't afford the pledge. But you graciously gave me an extra 3 days to pay it and make up for my rent I used to pay for the pledge. This is one of the most valuable items I own, so I figured it was the quickest way to repay you. At this point, they start freaking out. They want to get the laptop out right then, but the pawn shop was closed. So they rush to the church and fire up the Dino desktop and desperately try to recreate the videos we needed from scratch. However, they have no backups since mine was being exclusively used, and the programs and versions that I was using versus what the Dino had was completely different. Think Adobe Creative Cloud versus Final Cut Pro. In the end, we didn't have anything ready in time for service that Sunday morning, and the entire media team got yelled at by Pastor Corruption. I got double yelled at by the leaders of the media team, but it was worth it to see them panic. Several months later, I ended up leaving the church altogether, and was nice enough to give them all the files of stuff I had in my laptop. My only regret is being so amicable when I left, because fuck that place and fuck Pastor Corruption. However, last I heard, most of the people I knew there have left, and the church has downsized considerably and moved buildings. I assume they never got a new desktop for the media team after I left. This is one of the many outrageous aspects of this church, but it made me never want to deal with organized religion again, and now I'm mostly agnostic. 3. So 2 years ago in undergrad, I lived in an apartment off campus and rented one of 3 garage spots in the building. Because of the layout of the driveway, a car parked anywhere in the driveway would prevent access in or out of all 3 spots. For this reason, no one was allowed to park in the driveway, as was made clear by signage outside. Of course, other people in my building and the building next door would quite often leave a car or 2 in the driveway, sometimes just for 10 minutes, sometimes overnight. This became quite frustrating for those of us parking there, especially because we were paying so much for those spots. The main culprits were the guys in the unit above me. The first time I really interacted with them, they laughed about how it was so funny that we would get so annoyed that they blocked us in. Needless to say, this really irritated me, and I knew it would continue unless I took action. Yes, I did email the landlord about it first, and no, they did not respond. This drove me to pursue alternate methods of discouraging the driveway trespassers. The first tactic was known as the cheese drop. As the name suggests, whenever I noticed a car in my driveway for an extended period of time, I would go out at my balcony next to the driveway and drop a slice of cheese down onto the car. It was provolone, and it was expired, so even better. After doing this several times, I eventually saw them discover the cheese, and they were amused by it. I decided to escalate my antics. The 3 of us that parked there were responsible for shoveling the driveway when it snowed. The guys above us would always let their friends drive over the snow before we could shovel. When we had a big snowstorm, we noticed that they had let one of their friends park in our driveway. We told them he needed to move, and his solution was to pull up off the driveway into the neighbor's yard rather than leave. The neighbor's Wi-Fi was literally named "Do Not Park in Our Yard." They left us his number, and I texted him and said he couldn't stay there overnight. He told me that I could move the car myself if we wanted it moved. So when it snowed, we barricaded his car with several feet of snow on all sides. We locked our shovels up, knowing they didn't have their own. I watched from my apartment as I discovered the car fully blocked in. I warned them we put snow there when we shovel. They must have stood there with their heads on their hands for at least 10 seconds before one dug it out, while the other one stood around watching. The message was still ignored, so I took it a step further. I designed my own parking tickets and ticket envelopes and ordered them from one of those stationery websites. Now every time the car would park in my driveway, I would issue them a ticket. For legal reasons, I could not actually fine them or impersonate any kind of authoritative entity, but I got great satisfaction knowing that they would get a feeling of panic upon seeing an orange envelope on their windshield. They may have even thought the landlord actually put them there, who knows. Needless to say, a lot fewer people parked in my driveway after that. For clarity, we did not know at this time whether we could tow other renters from the driveway. 4. So this started some time back. I got fired from my job due to an inquiry and had to be hospitalized for a significant time. In my contract, it stated that if I had more than a certain amount of sick days in a 12-month period, I could get my contract terminated with 1 month notice. So that happened, and, of course, I contacted my union. They told me it was a legal termination, but they asked about a specific part of my contract, which was about my commission. Turns out I've missed out on some special commission during my employment and totally missed it when I read my contract when I got employed. Can't really get closer to which kind of commission due to my anonymity. My union advised me to contact the boss, show him the part of my contract, and prove all the missing commission and try to get a settlement. I was looking for what is the equivalent to 3,000 euros. I went to see my boss and started with a nice chat. After about 10 minutes I brought up the issue, and showed him my contract and showed him that I've never gotten the commission stated in the contract. My boss told me straight up to contact his lawyers, and that we were done talking and told me to leave. Cue malicious compliance. I went home, looked every paycheck through, and set up a meeting with a lawyer. We found a lot of small mistakes in my paychecks and summed it all up. We sent an official letter to his lawyers and got an answer from them a few days later. Now he was willing to settle for the first amount, the equivalent to 3,000 euros. I smiled and laughed. No can do, Mr. Bossman, not anymore. Now I want the full amount, which is equivalent to 10,000 euros, plus pension, plus 15% in damages, plus all the legal fees. And I have proof of everything to back up my claim. Due date of the court, and guess what? He lost big time. I have now planned a nice vacation and still have more money than I asked for in the first place. 5. Roughly 6 years ago, my wife and I decided to move. Pre-COVID times when everything was still cheap. Long story short there, we couldn't find any pre-existing houses that we really liked, but did find the neighborhood where we currently live, and built a house with the developer. As people do, we drove by every so often to look at the progress they were making on the house. One night we stopped and went out to look at the hole in the ground, as they had just gotten ready to pour the concrete for the basement walls. Here comes scumbag Steve, acting like a concerned neighbor because materials have been getting stolen. We explained that we'd be the new neighbors and had a brief conversation, when he commented that he and another neighbor are the unofficial neighborhood watch. Missed that red flag at the moment, but we left feeling warm and fuzzy because the neighbors looked after each other. Unbeknownst to us, scumbag Steve is really just an overactive nosy Nelly, and really just looking for ways to screw with people. A bit of foreshadowing now. Some things that he has done to other neighbors are letting his dog poop and pee wherever she wants without cleaning it up, looking through neighbors' trash cans, asking about a neighbor's doorbell camera, how far can it pick up stuff, etc. I know I'm being a bit nitpicky here, but it tracks for him. We also found out later that he's a drunk and he'll proudly brag about how he beat his DUI that he got after a heated argument with his wife. He's also a scavenger and scrapper. So who's really stealing those materials? Steve? One day, I decided that I want to start being a bit more self-sufficient and picked up some chickens to raise for eggs. Now, I'm really not that guy that wants to be annoying to my neighbors, but even then, the area that we live in is surrounded by farms and is farm-themed. I did my due diligence and checked town ordinances and the HOA guidelines that were given, and found no rules or ordinances against having chickens and poultry on your property. Backtracking slightly. When we signed our contract and went to settlement, we only received a one-page flyer that went over some basic items restricted by the HOA. No grilling in the front yard, no permanent basketball hoops in the street, no boats or RVs on a permanent basis, etc. There was no mention about the types of animals you can or cannot have. So working on the idea that I'm in the clear, I buy some chicks and begin raising them. I decided that since I had a kennel at my old house, we rented from my in-laws for a couple of years until we were ready to move. I'd go pick that up and set it up around my coop for the chickens to have some free roaming space. The kennel had 4 fence pieces that I could move on my own, but they were heavy, so I backed my truck up to my fence where the kennel was going to go in the backyard and start heaving them over. Scumbag Steve sees me doing this and offers to lend a hand with getting them over the fence, so sure, why not? He asks why I need a dog kennel if I have a fence, to which I inform him it's not for my dogs and for the chickens. I should have known that he was going to cause issues from here, because the next thing he asks is, "Your HOA allows chickens?" It was phrased that way because he had lived there when the first developer of that neighborhood owned it. But they went bankrupt, and my developer took over. It's the same HOA, but we didn't know that at the time. Anyway, I told him that I didn't see anything in the paperwork provided me regarding chickens, and that was that. Until the next day. Scumbag Steve comes over with a loaf of bread from his mother's bakery that he occasionally helps at, and is making small talk when he brings up the chickens again. This time he's only talking to my wife about it, but he again brings up that his HOA doesn't allow it, and he was bummed about that. That's where the story should have ended. Maybe about a week or so, I got a letter from the HOA.
It has come to our attention that you have chickens on your property. Per bylaw, that is not allowed, and you have 30 days to remove them from your property.
I was perplexed. How on earth did they find out about them, and why was I not provided with a copy of the HOA bylaws when I signed the contract for my house? The day after receiving the letter, my wife and I are on our way home from some errands, when another neighbor that we're friendly with flags us down and tells us, "I don't know if you know, but Scumbag Steve went up to your fence and was taking pictures of your backyard." For context, there was an empty lot between Scumbag Steve's house and ours. But that finally clicked for us. Scumbag Steve freaking reported us to the HOA. Me, being me, I'm not going to take this sitting down. I'm going to fight this. Some BS HOA, which is the Developers Maintenance Corporation, isn't going to tell me what I can or can't do on my property. Spoiler alert, they did indeed tell me what I couldn't do. Through a bunch of back and forth with the HOA, I get a copy of the bylaws and I start picking through them with a fine-tooth comb. I found out that someone has sent in 7 pages worth of pictures of all the infractions of the HOA rules, including a picture of my coop. I should also mention that I was in hot water with the HOA when I had our fence installed because it wasn't a split rail fence with chicken wire, so it didn't match the aesthetic the developer wanted for the neighborhood. They never said another thing about it though, and I ended up being the catalyst for everyone else doing whatever they wanted with their fences. So since I'm being petty, literally any fence that is white vinyl is technically against the HOA bylaws, and it states that they can only be split by rail, a maximum of 5 feet, and made of wood. But here's finally where the petty revenge comes in. You see, Scumbag Steve has an area of his backyard that is blocked off by some wood privacy fencing. That is not split rail, and much taller than the 5-foot maximum. Oh, and there's some unsightly plant growth that is outside the HOA guidelines regarding plants you can have on your property. Well, I think it's high time the HOA hears about these gross infractions of their bylaws, seeing as how we're all trying to do the right thing and follow the rules. So, I snapped a couple pictures of the privacy fence, the eyesore plants, and the static line he has for his dog in the front yard. I felt a little bad for the dog initially, but he'd leave her out for hours and she'd run into the street with cars driving by, since the static line was long enough for her to get her whole body past the curb. I can't tell you how many almost heart attacks I had because I was about to run over a dog. Well, I can tell you that probably about a week or so later, Scumbag Steve got his nasty gram from the HOA, informing him that he needed to move the static line, and remove the privacy fence because I watched with absolute glee as he removed his privacy fence. P.S. If you're wondering, we did initially move the chickens to our friend's farm that was right across the street from our neighborhood, but I have since moved the chickens back to my house, since I lost a couple to a fox that was living in the woods behind his property. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 332. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, hit the like button like it disrespected your mother. If you'd like early access to the videos, click on the link in the description that takes you to my Patreon, and you can support me there for as little as $1 or more a month. If you'd like to get your hands on some amazing Hellfreezer merchandise, you'll also find a link to the Hellfreezer Teespring merchandise store. And if you enjoyed the video, why not leave a tip? Click that little heart with a $sign in the middle. You don't have to do this, and you never do, but I appreciate it, and thank you. Alrighty. No other business. I don't think we've any shoutouts this week, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... What is... Oh wait, no, we can't ask that. YouTube won't allow that. I was going to ask you, what is the rudest named thing you've ever ate or drank? I say this as I'm drinking an energy drink called Pussy. I also once ate a spotted dick, but the less said about that, the better. Actually, you know what? Let's go for it. What is the rudest named thing you've ever eaten or drank? Try keep it as YouTube friendly as you possibly can. Okay, and now let's have the answer of the day. And today's answer comes from Revenge's Ice Cream, number 329. That is from Emerald Angel. Their answer is, and this is in relation to old wives' tales, I believe, opening an umbrella inside a house will bring you bad luck. Can't say if it's true, except for the time when I was a child, I opened an umbrella to jump off my high bed like Mary Poppins, only for my poor butt to be royally sore for a week after. Alright, and with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.